We're going to bring in our legal panel now. Criminal defense attorney Chip Merlin is with us, and former prosecutor Dan Shore, who's now associate managing director at Kroll. So Dan, as a prosecutor, there's no motive, as Greg says. 27 years have passed. What can the prosecution do in a case like this? Where do they go? Where do they start?
It's hard to prove a case without motive, but motive is not a requirement for proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt. You start with what we know. He was living at the home when the couple disappeared, and now we know at least one of them was killed because his body remains have been found. The bag shows the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee logo from the time that he attended that school, the same logo. And we know he's led a life of deception, and that goes to his credibility. There's a lot connecting him to the crime. The question is, can you prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And there will be challenges for that.
Chip, what do you think those challenges are?
Well, there's going to be all kinds of challenges with respect to the direct evidence because there's a complete lack of it in this case. And in today's day and age, most jurors are going to start to ask, well, is there any DNA evidence? Is there any fingerprints that link him to the particular crime itself of him actually doing it versus somebody else who might have done it and used the bag to put the bones into and bury him? That's the problem with the case here. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a very high standard to prove, even with direct evidence. And here we have none whatsoever. All we have is the circumstances of a con artist leaving and nobody knowing exactly why he would want to do this. And the jurors, while it's not a requirement, the jurors, particularly in circumstantial cases, want to know why.
Interesting. We've all watched a lot of CSI and Law and Order. It really ups the ante for what kind of evidence that we want to see in a court case when we're actually on a jury. Dan, how does his previous crime, the kidnapping, pretending he's somebody that he's not, how does that impact or come into play in this case?
Right, he had a whole marriage with deception, pretending he was a Rockefeller when he wasn't, and then he was convicted of abducting his daughter, and he's in prison. That shows his character. It shows his lack of credibility, that he's willing to deceive the public and his wife. So he's not someone that can be believed. Does that prove he murdered someone beyond a reasonable doubt? No, but it does, along with the evidence connecting him to the crime, it does make a case that the prosecution can bring to trial. There will, as I said before, still be challenges.
Chip, 50 witnesses are on the list. Again, almost 30 years has passed since this crime. So as a defense, I asked Dan this as the prosecutor, as the defense, how would you open up this trial? What would you say?
Well, from the defense side, they're going to pick apart each of these witnesses because most of us can't remember what we were doing yesterday, much less what was going on 27 and 30 years ago when all these bizarre circumstances that they're trying to put together to show a circumstantial case took place. Again, the credibility is bad for the defendant, but it's even worse for the prosecutor because most of these witnesses are not going to be able to remember exactly what happened 30 years ago. None of us can do it.
That's a good point. This guy has been in prison. He's serving a 5-year sentence, I believe, for the kidnapping and the betrayal, his con in general that we followed just a couple years ago. So we'll see if he remains in prison. If he's found guilty in this case, the trial begins today. Chip and Dan, great to see you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna.